Hello and welcome. Today we're going to delve quite deeply into the life, philosophy, and indeed the enduring legacy of one of the most influential figures in Western philosophy, culture, and society, and that person is Socrates. Born in Athens around 469 or maybe 470 BCE, and dying in 399 BCE, Socrates made significant contributions to ethics, to epistemology, and he also pioneered what we call today the Socratic Method, which is it's not like a form, it is a form. It's a form of dialectical questioning that remains the foundational sort of method behind philosophical education in the modern age, and we actually tend to spread that out much further. It is a method that is present in things like talking therapies. It is usually found in like coaching relationships, like mentor and mentee relationships, and so on. So the Socratic method has become embedded in Western culture and indeed philosophy. So, despite the fact that Socrates didn't leave behind any written works, his ideas are known to us because they were immortalized by his students, especially Plato. Plato is, really, when we think about Socratic philosophy, there is, it is difficult to separate what is Socrates and what is Plato. Plato was a student of Socrates, and the ideas of Socrates that are sort of presented to us are done through the lens of Plato. So these ideas they are often considered to be the foundation of modern philosophy, of Western philosophy in general. And still to this day, they continue to shape and guide philosophical thought and exploration. So throughout this lecture, this video, whatever you want to call it, we will be fairly comprehensive, exploring his Socrates' early life, his philosophical contributions, his public life, his trial, and we're also going to look at the evidence supporting his historical existence. Now that part's important because it is a matter of debate as to whether Socrates was a real person or just a character used as a device in the works of Plato and Xenophon and so on. But there is a fair amount of evidence to support the claim that Socrates was legitimately like a real dude. So that's where we're gonna end up. So we'll start with the early life and the background, as it were. Socrates was born the son of a stonemason and sculptor and a midwife. And although the details about his early life are, to say the least, sparse, we know that he likely received an education that was typical of Athens at the time, and that education will have included learning how to read, how to write, how to play music, and also a fair amount of like physical training. So the Greeks, they really valued physical and mental training and so on and so forth. So they tended not to separate the two things. It was as important to be educated physically as it was to be educated intellectually. And at this point, I think it's worth noting the significance of the professions of his parents, because his father's trade and his father being a sculptor and a stonemason. Likely that was quite likely to have instilled Socrates with a sense of craftsmanship and attention to detail, which we see manifest itself in his quite meticulous philosophical questioning, and his mother's role as a midwife also, in a way, parallels Socrates' own method of, shall we say, intellectual midwifery. So the dialogue that Socrates engaged in helped other people bring forth their ideas through the dialogue. So it's in a sense helping people birth their ideas. So Socrates was born in Athens, in Alapec or something. Sorry, I totally butchered that, but it's a Greek word and I'm terrible at pronouncing them. But basically, Socrates was born in Athens. That's the important bit. In and around 469, maybe 470 BCE. His dad was, as I said before, was a stonemason, and the exposure of the craftsmanship and the values of hard work and precision that his father had and had to have as a necessity for his profession had quite a profound quite a profound impact on Socrates. And his mother, who, as I said before, was a midwife, that sort of midwifery process also, I know I already said this, but it also heavily influenced Socrates, more specifically in his methodology, in the way that he went about helping people to bring these ideas to bear. So his early education was quite typical of an Athenian male at the time. Like I said before, reading, writing, music, and physical training, that sort of thing. And this, to put this into context of the world at the time, this was the Athenian education was an incredibly well-rounded and quite comprehensive education. And it was designed to prepare the citizens of Athens for their military service, which was not optional, and their participation in civic life, which was also not really optional. Socrates and let me try that again. Socrates, when in his early years, trained alongside his father as a stonemason and sculptor, and there are references to some of his sculptural works being displayed in Athens, although none of the works themselves, the statues themselves, have survived till today. So there is no way to actually confirm this, but nonetheless there were references by other people about his works being displayed in and around Athens. So the influence of his parents' professions on his later philosophical practice is really quite significant, and definitely shouldn't be downplayed in any way. The meticulous nature of stonemasonry likely instilled in Socrates a love, a passion, however you want to describe it, for detail and for precision. And we see that in his method of inquiry, in his questioning, always trying to get to a more precise definition and so on. And like I said before, his mother's profession, being midwife, and that is mirrored by the way that Socrates used his questioning to really pull an idea out of the ground, to really birth an idea or help somebody do so. Socrates was a married man, and his wife is often described as having, shall we say, a difficult temperament. Between them they had 3 sons, and the accounts of Socrates' family life suggest something that is mirrored quite frequently in modern life, and that suggestion is that Socrates' work, his philosophical pursuits, often took precedence over his domestic responsibilities and duties. And this will likely have contributed to the tension that existed in his marriage. So in the modern age, we've all experienced this. On whichever side of the line, we've all experienced or witnessed this in effect. When work becomes a person's whole life, the things that are outside of that become neglected, basically. And that, under any circumstance, that really does put pressure on relationships, whether they be friendships or romantic relationships and so on. Socrates, as all Athenians did, served in the military, in the Athenian military. He served as what we call a hoplite, which is like they're foot soldiers, but they are quite heavily armed. And Socrates participated in several military campaigns, and his bravery and resilience in battle were noted quite frequently by his contemporaries. And these experiences, shall I say, will have had a profound influence on his views on courage and duty, which he later explored in depth in his philosophical discussions. So that's the background, the origin story, as it were, of Socrates. And because Socrates didn't write anything down himself, he may well have done, but nothing that he ever wrote survived. And there isn't a great deal of granular fine detail surrounding his life that we're able to identify, but there are obviously these sort of key elements that are recorded and are and we see basically the influence of these things on his philosophical work. So our understanding of the philosophy of Socrates comes primarily from his students Plato and Xenophon, and also the playwright Aristophanes. The central pillar of the philosophy of Socrates is the Socratic Method, and that's in my opinion, that's the greatest contribution Socrates made to sort of modern life, and that contribution is, and this is just my opinion, but perhaps greater than any other singular contribution to philosophy in the history of philosophy. So the Socratic Method is essentially asking a series of questions to expose contradictions in a person's beliefs, and hopefully lead them and the audiences to a greater and clearer understanding. So this method is characterized by cooperative argumentative dialogue, and it's designed to stimulate critical thinking. So let's, in the interest of gaining understanding, let's have a look at some of the key features of the Socratic method. So first we have questioning and dialogue, and this is essentially the teacher asks a series of questions to probe the student's beliefs, examining their logic and their assumptions. So it is a series of questions and statements and responses and so on, but it's all leading to somewhere. It's breaking things down and examining, seeking more definitive meaning and like definition. And next we have critical examination. So through the act of questioning, participants are encouraged, would be a good word, I guess. Participants are encouraged to scrutinize their beliefs and identify any inconsistencies. Now, critical examination can often be misinterpreted as like an attack on an idea or a person and so on, but that's not the case. It is asking the person to think more deeply about the statement they've made or the belief they hold or whatever. And next we have elicitation of ideas. So rather than providing answers, directly answering a question, the Socratic method draws out knowledge from the participants, leading them to their own conclusions. So when engaging in the Socratic method, it's someone asks a question, and the ideal outcome isn't the other person answers that question. The ideal outcome is that the other person helps the person who asked the question to figure out what the answer is, or what they perceive the answer to be. What is their conclusion? So it is. It is more than just questions and answers. The questions, the answers, whatever they are just the vehicle by which the idea itself can begin to flourish and be properly sort of fleshed out and well articulated and so on. So next we have refinement of thought. And as you've probably figured out from the way that I've described it so far, the Socratic method is an iterative process. And going through those iterations helps the people participating in the dialectic to refine their ideas, to improve their ideas, to develop clearer and more consistent beliefs that are closer to truth. And then finally we have the focus on fundamental concepts. So this this method, the Socratic method, often explores the sort of core ethical and philosophical concepts, things like justice, virtue, and knowledge, because as far as Socrates were concerned, those are the things that underpin all things, essentially. Those are the core of thought, of intention, of action. So the exploration of those things allows the people participating in the dialogue to gain that deeper, more refined understanding of their own values and what they perceive to be like universal or maybe even objective values like justice and virtue and so on. So that is the Socratic method in in a nutshell, essentially. That is those are the important processes that are going on when you engage in the Socratic method. So I think it would be a good idea at this point to maybe give an example of the Socratic method in action. So the idea is to illustrate the Socratic method with a scenario, and in this particular scenario we are going to discuss the nature of courage. Now, this is obviously meant to be like a dialogue, so instead of me just reading it out from my notes, I'm going to tell you who's speaking first. So it would be like teacher or student. Teacher, the thing they say; student, their response, and so on. And that way, hopefully, you can keep track. I'm no good at like voices and and so on. So we've got to work with what we got, right? So yeah, we're going to start with the teacher. So the teacher asks a question: what is courage? Student: courage is standing up to fear. Teacher: can you give me an example of someone who is courageous? Student: a soldier who fights in a battle. Teacher: does a soldier who fights in a battle out of compulsion show courage? Student: maybe not, as they might be fighting because they have to, basically, not because they're courageous. So back to the teacher. So can we say that courage involves voluntary action? Student: yes, courage seems to involve voluntary action in the face of fear. Teacher: what about a firefighter who rescues people from a burning building? Is that courage? Student: yes, because the firefighter chooses to face danger to save others. Teacher: is there a difference between the firefighter's courage and the soldier's courage? What if the firefighter is also motivated by duty? Student: perhaps both are motivated by a sense of duty, but courage seems to involve the voluntary choice to face fear regardless of motivation. So in this really rough, quick, super simplistic example, the Socratic method helps the student to refine their understanding of courage by exploring the different facets and motivations behind courageous actions. Now, if this was a real conversation, it's not. But if this was a real conversation, it would be a lot longer, a lot more detailed. There would be a lot more nuance to it. But the underlying method is still the same, and the result is still the same. The student leaves that conversation with a better understanding of courage and a deeper understanding of what that means amongst other values and so on. So Socrates focused quite heavily on ethical questions such as the nature of justice, virtue, and piety. His famous assertion, "the unexamined life is not worth living," underscores his belief in the importance of self-examination in and the pursuit of virtue. So let's have a look at these themes in a little bit more detail. There's a lot that could be said about these themes, but I will endeavour to keep it fairly brief, because if we get held up here, then we'll be here forever. So we'll start with virtue and ethics. So Socrates believed that virtue was the most valuable of all possessions, and that the purpose of life was to grow in virtue. He argued that knowledge and virtue are intrinsically connected, with true knowledge leading to virtuous action. And then we come to justice. For Socrates, justice was a foundational concept, or a fundamental concept that required deep thought and examination. He challenged the conventional views on justice and sought to understand its true nature through dialectical inquiry. And finally we come to piety. Socrates also explored the nature of piety quite frequently, particularly in his dialogues with Euthyphro. He questions the traditional religious beliefs and practices of the time, seeking a deeper understanding of what it means to be pious. One of the things Socrates is quite famous for is his penchant for irony. Socratic irony is another hallmark, if you will, of his teaching style. So he often pretended to be ignorant in order to draw knowledge out from others, a technique that allowed him to challenge his interlocutor's assumptions and encourage him to think more deeply. This method of feigned ignorance, or Socratic irony as it's really called, was really quite, and actually it still is, really quite effective in exposing contradictions and also prompting self-reflection. So those are some of the sort of key points about the philosophy of Socrates. And beyond just the philosophy of Socrates, they're also quite insightful with regards to understanding the character of the man, and also the effectiveness of his methods, and also his intentions behind using those methods. So now we've looked at that, let's have a look at the public life and trial of Socrates. Socrates was a really quite well-known figure in Athens. He was somewhat of a celebrity, and he was often seen engaging citizens of all classes in philosophical discussions in the marketplace. His methods and indeed his ideas were often challenged, and the status quo and the authority of the Athenian elites made him quite a controversial figure, to say the least. He attracted many young followers, but also significant opposition. If you look at just about anybody who has had an impact, such a profound impact that the world literally changed, society changed, culture changed, and your imprint is left there forever, you will see that while they often have, in many cases, they often have their disciples, their followers, they nearly always have an intense opposition. And while this isn't always the case, it is a good rule of thumb, I would say, that if somebody or something has extreme opposition, really quite intense opposition, then that thing that those people oppose is probably worth looking at and examining in more detail, because that opposition, beyond just we don't think your ideas are right or whatever, and that kind of opposition, the opposition is also extremely emotive and in nature, and that's part of the motivation behind the opposition. So when you see somebody or something, an idea, a person, whatever, that has significant opposition, it is worth examining that thing and not sort of dismissing it out of hand. So in 399 BCE, Socrates was put on trial for corrupting the youth of Athens and impiety, specifically for not believing in the gods of the city, and also for introducing new deities. The trial of Socrates is by far one of the most documented events of his life, largely due to the accounts of his students, particularly Plato's Apology. So the charges against Socrates were twofold. So the first was corrupting the youth. Socrates was accused of leading the youth astray by encouraging them to question traditional beliefs and authority figures. His method of questioning and debate were seen as subversive. In fact, even in this day and age, when people engage in the Socratic Method, it is not uncommon for that to be viewed as being like subversive. So that was the first charge, corrupting the youth, and the second charge was impiety. Socrates was accused of not believing in the gods of the city, and of introducing new deities. So this charge was likely based on his unconventional religious views and his questioning of traditional religious practices. And I would add to that there was also the claim by Miletus in Plato's Apology of Socrates being essentially an atheist. So the defense of Socrates is it's discussed in Plato's Apology. So during his trial, Socrates defended himself quite eloquently, arguing that he was a benefactor to the city of Athens because he encouraged critical thinking and virtue. He quite famously compared himself to a gadfly. And he did so to sort of stir the city from complacency, essentially. So a quote from Plato's Apology really does quite beautifully capture this sentiment. I am the gadfly which God has given the state, and all day long, and in all places, am always fastening upon you, arousing and persuading and reproaching you. Despite his defence, Socrates was found guilty by a narrow margin. When asked to propose his own punishment, Socrates suggested that he should be rewarded for his contributions to the city. This suggestion was, as I'm sure you can imagine, was seen as being incredibly arrogant, and the jury ultimately sentenced him to death by consuming the poison hemlock. Socrates' death had a profound impact on his followers and also the course of Western philosophy as a whole. His willingness to die for his principles and his calm acceptance of his fate was seen as the ultimate demonstration of his commitment to virtue and philosophy. Plato's Phaedo provides a moving account of Socrates' final moments, where he was surrounded by his friends and was discussing the immortality of the soul. So really, Plato was trying to describe Socrates' demeanour before his death. The hour of departure has arrived, and we go our ways. I to die, and you to live. Which is better? God only knows. So this quote highlights Socrates' calm acceptance of his fate and his belief in the philosophical inquiry into life and death. And also it highlights Socrates' uncertainty, specifically about whether death is a good thing or a bad thing. He was undecided. So this quote, there's a few other quotes that highlight that particular point as well, but I think this one is a good one to really show that. So, but yeah, so Socrates' death, really it marked a how would you say, like a turning point in the history of philosophy. His ideas and methods were preserved and passed on and propagated by his students, particularly Plato, whose dialogues ensured that the teachings of Socrates would continue to influence generations of philosophers. Plato immortalizes Socrates in his dialogues, which really they serve as our primary source of knowledge about the Socratic philosophy. Works like the Apology, Crito and Phaedo and the Symposium, they present the Socratic ideas in a rich and actually really quite engaging manner. Plato's portrayal of Socrates has shaped our understanding of him and his philosophy. A notable passage from Plato's Apology captures the essence, I believe anyway, captures the essence of Socratic philosophy. I know that I am intelligent, because I know that I know nothing. So this quote encapsulates Socratic irony and the idea that wisdom begins with recognizing your own ignorance. Xenophon was another of Socrates' students, and his works also contributed to our understandings of Socrates through works like the Memorabilia, the Apology, and Symposium. So Xenophon's accounts are, when we compare them to Plato's writings, are much more straightforward and practical. And they also offer an additional perspective on the life and teachings of Socrates. In Memorabilia, one of Xenophon's great works, Socrates discusses the importance of self-discipline. No human being will ever know better what you need than you yourself, and only you can supply yourself with the necessary knowledge and training. So this quote is emphasizing Socrates' belief in personal responsibility and self-improvement, and I think also the idea that the soul, the spirit, the whatever you want to call it, that makes you who you are, can only benefit and grow from the acceptance of and embrace of personal responsibility and the continual self-improvement. Socrates' commitment to questioning and also to critical thinking laid the groundwork for the development of logic and also the scientific method. His emphasis on ethical inquiry influenced philosophical traditions that followed, and also including the development of virtue ethics. Socrates' influence is really quite vast, for lack of a better way of putting it, and it extends far beyond his immediate students. The Socratic Method became a cornerstone of Western philosophical education, which prompted rigorous examination and debate. His ideas about virtue, justice, and the examined life continue to resonate in like modern sort of contemporary philosophical discourse, and I believe that the influence of Socrates will be felt forevermore for us human beings. So, in order to deepen our understanding of Socratic philosophy, let's have a look at some of the some key quotes from the Socratic dialogues. So the first one we're going to look at, we've already looked at, but we're going to look at it again, is "The unexamined life is not worth living," and that comes from Plato's Apology. And this quote is it serves to expose the importance Socrates placed on self-examination and philosophical inquiry. It suggests that life without reflection and questioning is it is invalid. It's like completely devoid of value and of purpose and meaning, really. The next quote we will look at is, "I know that I am intelligent because I know that I know nothing," which also comes from Plato's Apology. And this statement is really quite a heavy hitter, in my opinion, because it captures the Socratic irony and the concept of like intellectual humility. It is in a sense a warning about hubris, about the dangers of believing your own hype. And Socrates believed that acknowledging your own ignorance is the first and also most important step toward gaining anything that could resemble some form of like true knowledge. We're going to have another look let me try that again. We're going to have a look at another quote from Plato's Apology, which is, "Virtue does not come from wealth, but wealth and every other good thing which men have comes from virtue." So let me try that again, because I started and stumbled there and it possibly didn't make any sense. "Virtue does not come from wealth, but wealth and every other good thing which men have comes from virtue." So this quote is Socrates attempting to emphasize the intrinsic value of virtue over like material wealth. He argued that virtue is the foundation for a good and meaningful life, and it's really quite hard to argue with that claim. And we see this idea mirrored in many other philosophies and religions and so on. There are ideas within Christianity, within Buddhism, and so on that in many senses sort of mirror that idea. So now we are going to have a look at a quote of Xenophon's from his great work, The Memorabilia. "No human being will ever know better what you need than you yourself, and only you can supply yourself with the necessary knowledge and training." So this quote was or is really attempting to highlight the importance of self-awareness and personal responsibility in Socratic thought. It reflects the idea that or the belief that Socrates held that individuals must take charge of their own education and moral development, an idea that is also found in other philosophies, especially those that followed, like the Stoics and so on. And our final quote that we're going to have a look at, that I think really does a good job of emphasizing, in this particular instance, the role that Socrates played within Athenian society. And this particular quote is again coming from Plato's Apology. I am that gadfly which God has given the state, and all day long and in all places am always fastening upon you, arousing and persuading and reproaching you. So this metaphor is an attempt at illustrating the role that Socrates played in Athenian society as like a provocateur and a perhaps more importantly a catalyst for critical thinking. It highlights his belief in the necessity of challenging complacency and also stimulating intellectual growth. So you'll see from those quotes that we've looked through that there are some common themes amongst them, and these themes are at the core of the Socratic belief system, and they are, for the most part, ideas that still to this day stand up quite well. So now that we've looked at the philosophy of Socrates, we've looked at the some of the history of Socrates, and we've looked also at some of the influence of Socrates through the eyes of his students and all of us that have followed since then. So now we come to the question of, was Socrates a real person? So, as I said at the beginning of this lecture, the existence of Socrates is something that is often questioned, because mostly because it's so long ago that many records have been lost to time. And also, because it's so long ago, it is difficult to verify anything. But the existence of Socrates is quite well supported by the primary sources from his time, which includes the works of Plato and Xenophon, his students, and the playwright Aristophanes. So there are some sort of key pieces of evidence that we can have a look at. So the first, most often cited, and indeed, in my opinion at least, most impactful for us in an attempt to verify whether Socrates was real or not, comes from Plato's dialogues. So Plato wrote numerous dialogues featuring Socrates as the main character, and these works present the Socratic philosophy and methods, and they provide a reliable depiction of Socrates. And for the most part at least, the character of Socrates in those dialogues is really quite consistent, and as such, it does, for me at least, I tend to lean towards the idea that they are pointing to a real person. Now, I will say that because of the style of writing of Plato, it can't really be properly confirmed, and at no point does he say this is an actual historical account, because Plato was a philosopher, and he wrote about, philosophy and metaphysics. So it is difficult to properly pin down whether Socrates was real, but I lean towards him being a real person. And then we have the writings of Xenophon. Xenophon, who was another student of Socrates, He also wrote about Socrates in his Memorabilia, his Apology, and his Symposium, which offered additional perspectives on his life and his teachings. And Xenophon was a much more straightforward writer than Plato. There was a lot less metaphor and poetry and so on in Xenophon's writing when you compare them to Plato's dialogues. And finally we have Aristophanes and his plays. So the playwright Aristophanes referenced Socrates in a comedy that he called, what was it called? The Clouds. That was what it was called. And this play, this comedy, was, although satirical in nature, it does help to confirm Socrates as a well-known public figure in Athens at the time. So those are the sort of primary sources that we use when we think about whether or not Socrates was a real person. But there are some secondary sources, and also there's like scholarly consensus as well. So the consistency of the depiction of Socrates across the various sources from his time, from like the contemporary sources, suggests that he was a real person. These accounts they align quite well on key aspects of his life. So things like his methods, the Socratic Method, the trial of Socrates, and indeed the execution. The Socrates' profound influence on his students and Western philosophy also further supports his historical existence. The cultural and political context of Athens during Socrates' life also does in some capacity support his the claim of his historical existence. Athens was a city-state that was known for its intellectual and artistic achievements, as well as its political innovations in democracy. Socrates' life and trial reflect the tensions within Athenian society, especially between the traditional values of the Athenians and the emerging, shall we say, spirit of inquiry and debate. So, Socrates' dedication to philosophy, his method of dialectical questioning, and his unwavering commitment to seeking virtue and knowledge have established him as a foundational figure in Western thought. Despite the challenges and obstacles he faced, and obviously his eventual execution, Socrates' legacy endures, inspiring countless individuals to pursue wisdom and live examined lives. But beyond that, it's also inspired great works of art and so on. So there is the legacy of Socrates really is infinite. So today we, this lecture, we've explored the life of Socrates, his philosophical contributions, his unique method of questioning, his trial and execution, and also some of the evidence to support the claim of his historical existence. We also, on top of all of that, we did a little bit of analysis of some key quotes from the Socratic dialogues to gain, hopefully, a deeper insight into his philosophy. Socrates remains a pivotal figure whose ideas and methods continue to shape philosophical inquiry and education, and will we as a society here in the West, it is, in my opinion, we have a lot to thank Socrates for, beyond just the Socratic method. We have him to thank for the result of that method, which is, as I say, the philosophy that came after that, the innovations in social and political life, and so on. So I think it would be a good idea to, if you've got this far, and we're probably approaching the hour mark, so we'll finish very, very soon. But because you've got here, I think now would be a really good time to have a think about how Socratic questioning can be applied in your own life. By examining your beliefs with a critical eye, we can, or you can strive for a deeper understanding of yourself and the world in which you exist. The legacy of Socrates reminds us of the importance of seeking truth, pursuing virtue, and living an examined life.